Hi, so good afternoon, world. This is Tim with Tech Talks with Tim. I'm joined today with Roman Pankew, the Vice President for Engineering and Sales. And I invited Roman on to have some conversation here. I'm frequently asked a bunch of questions. We get inquiries that come in, and so Roman, I've got some just some inquisitive things. People ask me all the time, what's the difference between iron and steel? Can you can you throw me something quick on that?
Sure, it might not be quick, but I'll answer that one. Um, there's several things to clarify. First off, there's iron. Iron is an element. It's a metal. It's extracted from the ground. It's a natural element. Okay. So when you start from that, everything else is a combination with iron. So steel is considered an alloy. And by that, I mean it's iron alloyed with something else. The simplest form would be carbon. So steel is iron plus carbon. Now, I think where people sometimes get confused is there are also terms like pig iron, and there are terms like cast iron. Those actually are considered pure iron with carbon as well. The difference between the cast iron or pig iron versus steel is the level of the carbon. Um, so in the case of what you call a cast iron or a pig iron, your carbon level is above 2% normally. So higher carbon in iron, cast iron, pig iron. Pure iron is a different thing. That's the thing you take a vitamin, you can take a vitamin, iron. That's an element. That's an element. That's a natural element. Steel has much lower carbon levels than iron does. So if you look at like cast iron, pig iron, you've got about a 2% higher carbon level. So the way they make iron normally is in a blast furnace. They throw in pure iron that's been mined, which actually isn't that. It's an oxide with other things to create these pig irons. And then what you do is then you take the pig iron and you blow oxygen through it. And when you blow oxygen through it, you're converting it to steel by bringing the carbon down to about 0.5 max. So steel has lower carbon, 0.5 or lower, whereas iron typically is 2% or higher. That's the main difference.
Okay, so some of the other things I get are, and I like to call this "what's in a name." Uh, we go on your website, they'll say, and we see all these different nomenclatures for the steel you guys manufacture, and I see Super 22H. I'll see Mo Ray or TMA 6350. Can you help me out a little bit on some of the naming, and how do I know what steel? What is it? Is there a way I can just tell that from looking at your website? Is there a simple way to do this?
That is a very good question. And obviously, other foundries have their own names for things, much like we do. The reason we use those names you mentioned, the Moray, TMA, Super 22H, those are trademarks of Duralloy. Um, they're from predecessor companies that we acquired. We acquired the technology. They acquired the trademarks to those names. So anything that comes out as an M-Moray, which is MO-RE, or a TMA, Supertherm, Super 22H, legally that can only be manufactured by Duralloy. So right off the bat, that's something you got to look at. No other foundry has been licensed. In the past, there were licensees, I'm talking decades ago, around the world that could use these because they're alloys manufactured under license. Now they're exclusive to Duralloy. So our first motivation is that there's a trademark on these alloys. The Moray series of alloys is a whole series of alloys. There's probably 50 different Moray alloys. So the Moray actually goes back to the original developers of the alloy, which were Martin Ornitz and Ray English. And
So Mo
they
Ray, their initials, basically.
Exactly. And they worked actually for a company called National Alloy, which was acquired back in the 70s and then merged into Duralloy in the 70s. And so there, all that technology transferred here. So those are a series of heat resistant alloys. So they started out with Moray 1, and then they went Moray 2. And we've continued that, and we've got all sorts of different Moray alloys. The number after really is just a number. It's a sequential number in some cases. You really have to dig a little bit deeper to find out what that is.
So
The
so basically, there's a there's a lot of morays, and do they like start with the same basic elements and then you just add a little bit of this or that, depending on the operation or the application that you want to use the steel in? Is that why there's more than just one? I mean, why don't you have Moray one and it's just the monster for everything?
Well, because every application requires a different type of alloy because all applications are different in terms of temperature, loading, environment, things like that. So there's an alloy decision to be made. None of the morays really, you can't extrapolate one from the other. The original moray, which was moray 1, is actually an HP grade alloy, and that goes back to some Alloy Casting Institute designations, now ASTM and SFSA, where it is a 25 chrome 35 nickel alloy that is also has a tungsten addition to it. So that's Moray 1. Whereas Moray 2 is actually a 50% nickel, 35 chrome with a large addition of tungsten, 15%. Completely different alloy for a much higher, more aggressive application. So it's hard to go one from the other because they're a whole series, all of them nickel chromium bearing, normally alloyed with some other carbide former, and they also some are iron based because iron's still the major constituent, but some are actually nickel based where nickel is the major constituent.
Okay. And then I've heard this TMA, um, and lately there's a new one, TMA 6350. Is that like specific, or where's TMA come from?
TMA comes from an acquisition that we made in 1997. We purchased, originally was Abex Electroalloys Corporation. They were based in Elyria, Ohio, and they had a research center in Mahwah, New Jersey. So a lot of that technology actually came out of Mahwah, New Jersey. There was a gentleman by the name of Howard Avery that was their metallurgist who developed a lot of different alloys which are used still today. And they originally used a T designation, meaning Thermax, and they use that as a trademark. And then TMA is Thermax microalloy. So when you see TMA, that means it's a heat resistant microalloy. We once again hold the trademark on that. We consolidate all that alloy technology back into Duralloy. The foundry, we operated it until 1999, but everything was then consolidated into Duralloy. So the TMA is a whole other series of alloys. Once again, a lot of different materials, a lot of different compositions involved. Probably another 20 to 40 alloys fall under the TMA designation.
So I've got like a dozen more questions, but in an effort to not make these things run on and on, I think we ought to do these in a series because this is a lot of great information. Before we before we uh before we end this particular one, because you said microalloy, and that's another question I get asked is what's a microalloy? I get asked about the difference between magnetic and austenitic and all these other type questions, which if you don't mind, we'll do another session at some point, and we'll cover some of these other topics. Um, However, I've got 2 points I want to cover before I go. One is, um, I hear you say frequently that we've always been green. Can you briefly tell me what you mean by we've always been green?
Well, first off, the most recycled material in the world, the most recycled material in the world is steel.
Wow.
And there has always been a big push. What happens is once people use steel, cars, whatever, you may see the cars are crushed up into small squares.
Right.
Those are then used once again in a steel mill. They go to the people that run electric arc furnaces, a lot of the mini mills. That's what most of their charge is recycled steel. In our case, we also use a lot of our own alloy returns because there's a lot of value because ours is actually alloyed with a lot of expensive elements that can be recovered. So once a product goes out into service, after a certain amount of life, it fails for creep or whatever reasons, we get it back, we remelt that and make new products out of that. There is some restriction because we do find some drop in properties when you use too much recycled material. But in a lot of cases, we do some refining steps to bring it back in. So yeah, we basically anything we send out the door here can be brought back and recycled in our facility. And that is a big portion of our business. The other part of our green strategy is a lot of the products we make replace things that were water cooled that actually took heat out of a furnace. And we have been able to substitute something that used water cooling that sucked a lot of energy out and replaced it with a structurally strong component that was just strictly just a high temperature alloy. So Duralloy likes to pride ourselves that we now have saved enough energy to power a large city for a year with this technology.
Awesome. And so what I want to leave you guys with is we'll do a follow on to this. We may end up taking 2 more sessions. Regardless, we're going to finish in what's in a name and then the difference in alloys and all that stuff. However, I wanted to just let everybody know that this is 2021 when we're filming this video. 2021 happens to be the 100th anniversary for Duralloy Technologies. And we will have more that kind of follows. If you have questions, this will be posted in several means between a podcast, between on YouTube and other areas. If you have questions that lead from this after you've been after you've heard it, or even our follow-ons, please share the questions and we'll try to cover those in another session. Again, Roman, thank you for your time.
Pleasure.